tortilla.
The hardest part of the tree, but they don't let the trees grow that big before they cut and melt the lumber anymore. So you really can't get that density of wood unless you take down one of these old homes. And I think that wood also goes a long way toward explaining why a lot more of these homes weren't demolished during the siege. Vicksburg used to have a lot more of these type of homes down in Washington Street, closer to the river. And most of them were demolished over the decades just through neglect. But a lot of those same homes were hit 15 and 20 times by artillery fire from the gunboats during the siege, but they weren't demolished. And I don't think a modern house can take anything like that kind of pounding and still be standing up. Now, before we go up the steps, I wanted to point out something on this banister. You can notice little architectural features around the house, and you might think, oh, that's a neat touch. But almost nothing was done randomly. Everything had a meaning or a purpose. Now, this little wooden button in the center, that had a special meaning. That was called a brag button. That button meant that when the first owners came into this house for the first time, the house was completely paid for. If it hadn't been paid for yet, that wooden button wouldn't be in the center of the banister. And underneath there, they used to have a hollow wooden cylinder, and that's where they keep the original deed to the house. So when you came into your home for the first time, if it was completely paid for, you could pull off that button and take out your deed. Now, I think that's pretty neat, it's convenient, but I think it also says a lot about the way people thought in those days, that you wouldn't have any problem with the deed to your brand new mansion being 3 feet from the back door. That would make me a little bit nervous, but I guess they were good with it. Now, let's go upstairs. Dueling was common in those days. It was considered an honorable way for men to settle their differences, but it was illegal in Mississippi. However, Louisiana's laws are based on the Napoleonic Code, not English common law like the rest of the country, and they didn't have any problem with dueling. Well, there used to be an island that was in the middle of the river out here. Once you're halfway across the river, you're technically in Louisiana. So if a man from Vicksburg challenged you to a duel, you'd go to the island and have a duel, because you could kill him legally over there. Come back to this side of the river, and you're still okay in the eyes of the law. But that was, of course, if you won, and the judge didn't. So, he came back in a box. But just to give an example of how prevalent dueling was at that time, there was a local lawyer. Oops, there was a local lawyer in Vicksburg, a gentleman named McClung, Alexander McClung. He was known as the Black Knight of the South. We know he killed 33 different men in duels, and supposedly 7 of those 33 men were all brothers in this. I guess, I don't know. I think I'd have figured it out after 2 or 3 brothers and let the man let him alone. Let's go across the hall and copy everything the British did. Okay, so the ladies' parlor would typically be decorated in what they thought of as Victorian fashion, which to me, I'm a fashion caveman, but Victorian decorating is extremely cluttered. Okay, you have knickknacks on top of knickknacks on top of knickknacks. It's a nightmare to clean, but that's the way they wanted to do it. Give you an example of how much they copied the British. Queen Victoria put up the first Christmas tree in Buckingham Palace. The next year, there were more Christmas trees in the American South than the entire country of Britain. So they picked up everything from the British. And in a lot of these old homes, you'll see a lot of furnishings with an Oriental motif. They picked that up from the British as well. The British copied that from the Chinese. They thought it was neat, so they copied it from the British. Now, a lot of guests have asked about the color scheme on the walls. Would that have been common in those days? Actually, no, you wouldn't have seen that. You would have seen very fancy wallpaper. Very, very ornate wallpaper. That was what they put in these old homes. But what wallpaper was still available in the hardware stores when the city came under attack was purchased by the newspaper editor. And that's what he used to print the newspapers on during the siege with wallpaper. And I think it's just a neat coincidence. The Caldwell's other home, Steel Cottage, the lady who was living in that house when the city came under attack, she got out of the house and went north to Oak Ridge to get away from all the shelling. Well, the newspaper editor moved his printing press into a cave that was on their property, and that's where the newspaper was printed in Vicksburg during the siege, right over here at Steel Cottage. Well, he had the newspaper editor had everything laid out in that printing press for the last day's edition when the Union troops took the city. Grant had bragged he was going to have dinner in Vicksburg on the 4th of July. Well, the newspaper editor had taken offense at that evidently, and had put in the paper, before you cook the rabbit, you have to catch the rabbit first. Well, the Union troops took the city, and he ran. They found that printing press with that paper ready to be typed up, and added some typeset down at the bottom and said, Grant has caught the rabbit. He'll be dining in the city tonight, and he's brought his dinner with him. So they printed that up and handed it out to all the citizens as what they called a curiosity. I think it was more of a really big rub your nose in it kind of deal. Well, if they were having a ladies' function, it would happen in here. If they were having a ball or a dance, as we would call it, they would clear out all this excess furniture, You'd have seating on one side of the room for the ladies. The men would stand on the other. Typically, music would be a string quartet at one of the corners. Well, if you wanted to ask a lady to dance, you were expected to follow the protocols. You'd walk across the room, you'd politely bow and ask if she liked to dance. Well, she could say yes or she could say maybe. She couldn't say no. That'd be considered rude, both to the guest and to the host and hostess. But she didn't have to say yes either. She could fudge a little bit, say something like, I'm dizzy at the moment. You know, any lame excuse for saying no without actually saying no would be accepted. In the day, since the gentleman would write his name on a piece of paper and he'd leave it with the lady, so she would know somebody was still waiting for a dance. Now, to me, that's a quaint practice, but it's kind of silly too, because if you only got 10 people in the party and half of them were men, you'd think she could remember 1 out of 5. But that was considered the proper way to do it. Now, if they were having a dinner that night, the hostess, who of course was married, would come in and tell the men which ladies they would escort into the dining room and where they would be seated. Well, you might not necessarily be seated next to the woman that came with you. It was up to the hostess to decide the seating arrangement. So as you can imagine, she could have some fun with that if she wanted to. That's a cow. No big deal. You wouldn't think it's just a cow. But think about it, that's got to be a Yankee cow. There's no way that cow survived 47 days of siege in this part of town. The locals always said they never surrendered to the north. They surrendered to famine. They were starving to death. They were eating mules. Had a cow was wandering around here, the whole neighborhood would have barbecue. That's a Yankee cow. He came in and was his friend. Now, I thought that was a little bit odd, but I did some research and found out when Grant came through Natchez, Mississippi, he confiscated about 3,000 cows. So that man started out as a Southern cow, but it was drafted into the Union Army. By the time we got to Vicksburg. Of course, in those days, there was no air conditioning, so anytime you built a home of any size in the South, but particularly one of this size, you did everything you could structurally to maximize ventilation in the home. You had the huge doors on the north and south ends of the house that you could leave open in the daytime, hopefully have a breeze. Those upper windows would originally been louvered and they would swivel inward for additional ventilation. The high ceilings, the idea with that is you're hoping in the summertime that the majority of the heat will stay in that part of the house and not be so much around everybody's head level. Now, of course, in Mississippi, it's always brutally hot in the summertime. But if I'm on the 3rd floor and I'm walking up the steps toward the attic, right as you get about ceiling level, it's like hitting a heat wall. It's like instantly 20 degrees higher. So those high ceilings really help a lot in keeping most of the heat in that part of the home. And that's actually a ventilation grate you can see in the ceiling. It's part of the original construction. It's designed to help with airflow in between the floors. And there's another one underneath that carpet there. It just doesn't get used anymore. Now, that thing does work well though. If you're standing above that grate and these doors underneath are open, you can usually feel a breeze coming up through there. And this molding you can see all the way around the line of the ceiling and in the rooms on either side. I just assumed that was fancy wood crown molding, but actually that's done in plaster. They would take horsehair and add horsehair to the plaster to give it extra consistency and literally use molds and go all the way around the line of the ceiling. And that's how you get that effect, it's plastering horsehair. And in some of the older homes in Vicksburg, they actually use horsehair for insulation in the houses. And some of y'all may have stayed over at Steel Cottage last night. Caldwell's other house. It's a smaller home about 3 blocks south of here, but it's actually about 25 years older than this one. Rick had to do some work on the house and he had to take down the wall. Well, he pulled down one of the walls and saw horsehair behind it. But I can't imagine how many horses it would take to insulate your house. You probably have a whole herd of all of the horses running around. Well, as I said, during the siege, this being the oldest part of town was catching the brunt of the show. Well, this home had been hit by artillery from the gunboats 4 or 5 times. And they finally had a cannonball come through the roof in one of the bedrooms upstairs. So that was Duff's wake-up call. He decided he had to do something to try and save the house. So we made it a military hospital. Now, all you had to do in Vicksburg during the siege to be a military hospital was basically just run up a yellow flag and open up your doors and take in wounded. And there were wounded all over the city. And when this home was a military hospital, they had as many as 200 soldiers in here at one time, Union and Confederate. Okay? Now, there's this postcard on the wall, and this was made about the turn of the century, and it shows a picture of the house, and it says Old Confederate Hospital. But we know for a fact there were Union and Confederate troops here. We had a guest who stayed with us a few months back. He had an ancestor who fought with one of the Michigan regiments that was involved in the Vicksburg campaign. And he showed me copies of original paperwork he had that showed his ancestor staying at the Duff Hospital before the city was surrendered. So we know there were Union and Confederate troops in here. Well, once the gunboats found out this was a military hospital, they redirected their fire away from the area. So we really credit Duff for saving this house and mostly antebellum homes in this area, and the church next door as well. That's Christ Episcopal Church. It's the oldest continuously used public building left to the city. It's been here since 1838, and they actually had services every day during the siege. Now, if you stop and think for a second about the amount of shelling this part of town is getting hammered with, courageous doesn't quite describe it. I mean, I was told at one point every window in that church was blown out except one, but they never missed a day of services. And from what I'm told, they had some pretty eccentric characters going to church over there. After the city was surrendered, 4 of the ladies who were parishioners in that church were banished from the city limits because they refused to pray for Abraham Lincoln. So that's pretty far old lady.